People are just not all the same. They have different values, and some values are going to be far more compatible with your welfare and your goals, your values, than others. And that doesn't mean to say that the others don't need rescue, but it does mean that they are going to cause a big mismatch to yourself until that comes about, or unless or until that comes about. I mean, it is the case that some people are loyal, are concerned about others' welfare, considerably. I won't say necessarily as much as their own. That would be complete love, wouldn't it? But people are at different places, shall we say, along that continuum from complete self-love to complete love of all. And by love of all, I would include oneself equally, you see, as some sort of notion of the ideal. You come across some people who are majorly concerned with their own position and do follow a beggar, my neighbour approach. They may see the world as zero-sum gains. In other words, my gain, well, your gain is my loss even. And be aware that in certain situations my gain is your loss, and pursue my gain pretty ruthlessly, pretty singularly. It may be therefore in their interest to be, perceived interest, to be criticising you and pulling you down and so forth. This doesn't mean they don't need rescue. Of course they do. They need rescue from this habit-causing inclination. And whilst they are not rescued, they are costly and harmful to those around them. There are many zero-sum games in the world, but we can nullify or overcome such by doing our best to compensate people where such situations are unavoidable. And where there's many such opportunities, we can let some people, we can follow a policy whereby each individual has a fair share of wins and losses, losses. And we say, don't we, well, it's his turn in some sense. We feel we would be much happier if each of us had one bite of the apple. Certainly the bite I have, you don't get, and the bite you get, I don't get. But, well, we could cut up the apple and have a bit each. There will be some situations where it's your life or my life. It can't be both. And the one implies the loss of the other. Well, that's a very dramatic problem, but the more general problems are able to be handled by a fairness and a concern for others that somehow makes the overall outcome of living more equal, more kind, more loving. with the very extreme cases of it's my death or your death, for the other one to live, well, I'm not sure as I can say what's right in this situation, but I can say that the outcome chosen is understandable in some sense. We're in sympathy with the person that just couldn't bring themselves to surrender their own life to ensure another has their life. And we're probably immensely impressed with the person who dies for the sake of someone else. And that's really what the Jesus account says, isn't it? A greater love is this than that a man lay down his life for his friends. But then he modifies the sort of situation he's generally thinking of, because he's saying, you are my friends if you do whatsoever I tell you. Now, apart from the fact this sounds very dictatorial, we see that the death he's referring to here is not the end of physical life, particularly it's a willingness to serve or obey or follow the teaching rather than the old will of that you might have had as regards self-interest and so on. That the care and love of others is in some sense the death of self, the identifying of everything from one's own personal narrow desires and welfare. That the death of self is rather the state where it's the welfare of others too, at least one other, is of major importance to you. I'm not sure if I want to say too much more than simply major importance to you. When you fall in love, you are in some sense selfless towards the other person, in that their welfare becomes immensely important to you. You're quite literally happy because you know they're happy. Their happiness has an incredible impact on you as regards simply you knowing that they're happy compared to not. So you do that which brings about that welfare to them. So nothing deeply new here, but just reviewing what we might mean by selfish individual and a selfless individual. Not self-effacing, but not a lot of things, but definitely valuing all other life anyway as important, not just your own. And important not just from the welfare of yourself point of view, but from them being an individual that experiences welfare rather than loss. This has become significant to you. So the more you pursue such what we'll call selflessness, I think I ought to use a different phrase, but love, I think I should say. The more we pursue the loving of others and life around us, the more positive we try to be in encouraging them, helping them, guiding them, blessing them. We have a great desire to be a blessing to life, other life, at least one other life. A great desire to, bless. In other words, not just a great preoccupation with one's its own blessing and state. Although ultimately you would think enlightened self-interest would result in the same thing. Except what happens when the person with enlightened self-interest, that the welfare of others is important to his own well-being, what happens when
we're in a mutual my gain is your loss situation?
So I can save your life or my life, but not both. A zero-sum game, an ultimate, what we might want to define as an ultimate zero-sum gain game. In other words, there could be a fine line now between enlightened self-interest, which simply cannot surmount that situation, and a true selflessness that holds the welfare of others as important as yourself. In this case, his welfare or your welfare is going to be achieved, and you're in an extreme situation where you have that situation you have to choose. I mean, do you just toss a coin because both parties are equally important? Do you step down for the other one? You die for their life? I don't know as I have the answer, and I don't know as... Well, I'm clear that at least most of the time this is not the case. But in a sense it is, isn't it? We think of people in desperate poverty in the world, and when it really comes to the crunch, we don't choose desperate poverty to share our possessions entirely with them. We keep enough for us to survive first, and then them. And what about the situation where you don't do that? You give away all and starve with them? That doesn't seem too rational. I don't know. We're blessed by not normally being majorly confronted with that situation, although in a sense it continually exists because we do live in a world of desperate need, and we could surrender our needs into meeting those needs. And we obviously don't. Does that mean in some sense a failure on our part? We might feel it to be, and it might be. And we could bring this to God in recognition. Perhaps it's a recognition that keeps us humble and makes us, in some sense, realize before God that we don't even understand what's best here. And we've got an inbuilt resistance to, such an inbuilt resistance to suffering, that our own suffering, that it does major above other people's. And so we've only been selfless of some degree. Not the ultimate greater love hath this, no man hath greater love than this, that he lay down his life for his friend. Is this a situation I should be, in some sense, pursuing? Able and willing to lay down my life for my friend? if you think of it, to love your neighbour as yourself, it says that. It doesn't actually quite give an answer, because it doesn't say love your neighbour more than yourself. Even loving God, he's not saying you should love God. Is he saying you should love God more than yourself? With all the heart. That doesn't leave much for yourself, does it? With all thy strength and purpose. So the story is saying that, isn't it? Not shifted now from he to it. My defences are there, aren't they? Protecting my selfhood. But it does say with all, and the object is God. It doesn't include oneself. Except there's a hope and perhaps a belief too, consistent with the hope, if you like, that God's welfare somehow, everything will be all right, including one's own welfare, but the welfare of all, in his kindness and goodness, that he can do what is right where I couldn't, and be the greatest blessing, in some sense, in a way that's right and good, in a way that I cannot decide, and recognize that I cannot choose. And you might say, yes, but loving God with all does choose, does imply this selflessness. Yes, but possibly still in the hope that somehow the zero-sum game dilemma will be removed and things will all be all okay after all. It's an incredible faith, isn't it? You see, not to have any other gods before me looks pretty straightforward. In a pedestrian way, I don't worship anyone else. I focus on God. But if it really means the other interpretation of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength, my goodness, that's spectacular, isn't it? It's a magnificent goal to have, but to achieve it is stupendous, utterly stupendous. I'd have to be God to achieve it. In fact, if I'm able to do it, I am on a par with God in some spiritual, or at least in one of the spiritual dimensions. For I suppose can I say as a person, what would his ethics be? My ethics are to love God with all heart, soul, mind and strength. What's God's ultimate ethics that we value him for? That he loves me with all his heart, soul, mind and strength? Or that he loves all of us with his heart, soul, mind and strength? Again, including himself as a person. I think I have to pause here. I'm on an incredibly staggering type of issue. I can solve that. At least I have a method of solving it. I'm not sure what the outcome is. Let me imagine him to be not my God, but my child. Someone I utterly love and care for. No, it's no good. I have to transcend the whole problem. I've got to say, it's an ultimate dilemma that I can't solve. I have some notion of what's important, which is to care for others more than I do, and to care for us equally. There seems to be something logically inconsistent about caring for others more than myself. In other words, the sort of classic Buddhist response of, I can't choose in certain circumstances, because I don't have a priority of one person for the other. Neither you for me nor me for you. I simply do not have a priority. I cannot choose. I would have to say, Father, this is a desperate situation. I give it to you. Perhaps you could just change the situation, could you? I need a miracle, Lord. Please come to our rescue. Wow, I've got the answer. If he doesn't, he doesn't, but I trust that he will. And I'll even try most earnestly to trust him, even if he doesn't come to the rescue. Why? Because I love him. Who else would I trust? So it's not an ability to do good that I worship. It's an ability to trust him for where I can't. And there's something about that in at least the Christian faith, and perhaps you can see it in all faiths, I'm not sure. But something about that quality of being able to trust even where you can't do. You recognize an inadequacy in yourself or a possible dilemma that you can't solve. And you solve it in a strange way, in that you surrender it to God. Say, I can't understand this, Father. And I think I'm up against a barrier that I should be going through, and I can't see the way. Is it because of my very self or what, Lord? But may I surrender it to you. Please rescue me from this dilemma. I trust it into your hands. And all I can say is I love you, Lord. I love you not in my being impressed in my own achievement in loving you, but I love you more in this sense of I've just come to give you my inadequacy here. I can't handle it, Lord. Thank you that you understand in some way. And you may or may not have a solution for it, Father. But I thank you I can just leave it there. Love you. Love you, Lord. I thank you I can just leave it with you. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, perhaps you can realize I'm in tears now. I've come to that point of, sort of a point of surrender, haven't I? Where I just realise my view is inadequate, and I surrender myself into his arms. I take refuge rather than surrender. I just take refuge in God, and I'm so thankful that in some sense I can do that. I can just unload the burden of not being happy, that I can find the way through this confusion, this problem, this dilemma. I give my dilemmas to you, Father, and somehow I trust and believe within me in your goodness in handling it where I could not. There's a chorus going on in my mind that I surrender, I want to know you more. That there's a goodness in just recognizing one's inability to see one's way through at times. And it's a great relief to somehow just give it to him and say, can't handle it, Father. Trust it into your hands. Thank you that I can relieve myself of this dilemma in this way. And to feel such gratitude to God for feeling free to do this, for trusting in his acceptance of such, and just continuing love despite that. So he doesn't love us for our strengths. I don't love my child for the strengths. I love my child. They have strengths, and that's good because I love them. If I didn't love them, I would see their strengths as, in some sense, not necessarily of value to me at all, just irrelevant. But because I love them, I delight in their strengths. I think it's that way round, isn't it? So we start to get some insight into the goodness and the love of God. But we can always come back to, can't we, that John 17 sort of principle. Would you understand the problem in the light of a loving father, parent, to their son, their child, their daughter, their child? When you understand or cast the problem in those terms, you start to see the tractability of the matter. And I think I'm going to leave it there. For a minute anyway. Thank you, Heavenly Father. It comes to me that if I love you and you're in that situation, if I define selfless love as to love you more than me, I would be very unhappy then if you were going to choose to put me first and to say die yourself in the simplistic zero-sum game. Because I'm more concerned with your welfare than mine, and you're going to choose my welfare instead of yours. So I would prefer in that very situation, given my inclination to value you more than me, for you to choose selfishness. And if I know you're of the same opinion as me in the same dilemma back, I would know that you would be upset with me for choosing to value you in such a way. In other words, I've reached an equilibrium in where to put the goalpost. It's not in to love you more than myself. because that results in a contradiction when we're both doing it. It's not a universal principle. If I love you more than myself and you love me more than myself, we cannot be happy with the outcomes that either party chooses. We cannot both be happy. Only one or the other will be happy with this. You'll get your way and die for my sake, and I'll get my way, or I'll get my way and you die. I die for your sake. That will be unacceptable to you, because you value me more than yourself. And if you choose to die for my sake, that will be unacceptable to me, if I truly have your welfare more to the fore than my own. So, we know that to love others more than ourselves is not ideal, in the sense that it's not universal. If we both have this, we don't have a solution that's universal. Only one person choosing to have their way, and the other one live, and the other one being very distressed at this outcome, having lived and you died for me. And I think that's what we've done with the Christian story. It's not acceptable for us that this wonderful man called Jesus dies for me. Yes, it does mean I have life, but we don't want it at the cost of his. That seems just appallingly awful. It's made acceptable by the fact that in some sense he's not dead, but on the contrary, now reigns in magnificent glory of life, beyond all comprehension to us. Do you see, we've tried in the story to get it both ways. We're moved dramatically in that he's willing to suffer such for us, but not actually die in the normal dead secular sense of that's the end of all life for himself. All life in any dimension, because of course the secular world sees only the physical dimension, so to speak, in the extreme. And to die is to lose, therefore, all life. And the dread of death is that is the reality. That the possible reality is, oh, I've finished all of my experience of living. Whereas, of course, the Christian has the quite reverse hope that, no, I've got an infinite, wonderful, magnificent future with God, of living beyond all realms of conception, but wonderful, magnificent. Christian story is in some sense based on a misunderstanding then, that he both dies, a paradox, an oxymoron really. He's dead but entered into eternal life. I mean, well, death is not bad then, is it? And that's the sort of Pauline thing, isn't it? That in some sense, death, where is thy sting? I mean, we're going to heaven to be with glory with God. And it's not that Jesus is not going to be there. On the contrary, it's quite the reverse. Everything of Jesus is there, and in a more magnificence and glory and fullness. The glory that I had with thee before the world was, as John 17 puts it. So if we're now thinking of the crucifixion, we say, well, we might be assuming that the pain and the suffering is definitely there. Well, the pain is there, but that in some sense the suffering is not there, because he knows in his heart what his future is. He trusts God utterly. Now, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? We're suddenly confronted with the possibility that this is not so. In other words, this introduces an uncertainty to us. And now we're in a sort of, we're not quite in a panic, but we worry that perhaps he's in a panic, that he's now suffering as we suffer. He's going through great difficulty without knowing for a moment that God is with him and is going to make everything fine. And then, of course, I was going to say desolated, if there's such a, if there's such a English way of saying that. We're suddenly desperately concerned for his welfare. Such a lovely person, being faced with the reality of the feel of how we feel in our reality, not knowing, but having to trust, and for a moment losing that hope. Why have you forsaken me? I seem to have the compelling evidence that you're not with me. Now, we might in some supernatural understanding take this to mean that he literally felt the lack of the presence of God at that moment. Or we may take it, no, not at all. He's simply referring to Psalm 90 or whatever it was, because it's the opening lines of it. My God, why have you forsaken me? In other words, for some reason he's quoting this Old Testament psalm. But if he is, he's probably quoting it because, well, is he quoting it because that's how he's feeling? It summarizes how he's feeling. That he is actually feeling what we feel. And compared to having known God magnificently, even on earth, leave alone in heaven, before the world was, compared to that, that is utter desolation, to feel that God had forsaken him. But I might also say that it comes almost as a shock, not just to us, but to him. But in some sense he was not anticipating quite that. And can I say that is in some sense the great gift of the story? That he is, if only for a moment or 3 days or whatever it is, mortified. That Jesus is mortified in some spiritual sense as we feel mortified in our separateness from God. At times. Does that mean he's suffering as much or more than us? Relative to what he's known, rather more. It's not clear at that moment that he has the consolation of what he has known, just as we might not have in such situations. Suddenly we just feel, but there's no God. He's not with me here. To be forsaken means no longer being rescued and cared for. that God no longer seems to have the intention of doing so, because he's not doing so. You see, this is not a trust. This is not a trust statement. This is a moment of confrontation of a possible reality, probable reality, visualized reality that God is not with you. And you're, dare I say, hopelessly at risk for a moment, for a while, unless or until God rescues you. And in some sense you could say, and in 3 days he was rescued. Or at least by the time 3 days was up, and perhaps, the moment the body died, stopped working, we don't know. And that in some sense makes it all right again. But the ultimate hard experience, so we can feel for our kids when they are faced with a dilemma. Feel in the sense that we know or remember or can recall or imagine the dilemma they're in and be so concerned for them. For their loss of happiness, their suffering. But to return to solutions as regards what the goal is as regards selflessness. I think the Buddhist had it. It's an equality. I really don't want you or God to be annihilated for my sake, any more than you want me to be annihilated for your sake. And that's somehow where we are. And we hope to move towards a situation where those situations simply are not, do not occur, are not the reality. We seek a reality where that will never be. Guess that's all we can say. So that the goal in this reality is simply to, in the extreme, not have a solution. Some situations we can't choose. That was the Buddhist response. 3 men in a boat, the boat's going to sink unless one of them goes overboard, or if you like, unless one dies for the others to eat him. And the Christian has a solution. He says, me, I make the offer. And the Buddhist says, no. We can't decide. We're all equally important. I cannot make such a decision. And the secular person says, well, it's not going to be me, mate. And I'm laughing, but it's obviously an utterly desperate matter, in fact, isn't it? I'm not laughing with joy here. I'm laughing with a way of giving some relief to the tension of an impossible dilemma. And so we can create impossible dilemmas, and there may be some impossible dilemmas that exist. And we would see that as an evil, something that should be avoided if we possibly can. In other words, I'm saying the issue itself should be avoided, and situations that result in such. And my goodness, didn't need an intellectual genius to tell you that. Anyone could have told you that. It would be best if such situations don't exist. And I'm going to avoid zero-sum gains wherever I can. And the world of the pursuit of profit and competition has a certain downside to it in that regard, doesn't it? If my profit is at your cost, well, that's not a terribly good system. It may have all sorts of good spin-offs, technological advance and so on, but it sounds hazardous to me. Is there any way we can patch such an awful system up, or even find something better in some way? Thank you, Heavenly Father. So I try to, in general, not too seriously, but I try to avoid even playing with my kids and other people the zero-sum game. You know, to play chess with the wife and have me win. Well, I'm not happy for her sake then. And to have her win, well, if she's worth her salt, she's not very happy that I keep losing. So we've come to a solution where we're both in the back of our minds making sure that the other wins a pretty even number of the times. And if we both have that goal, we can play chess. If we don't, if one has the goal that the other if one of them has the goal that they must themselves win, then we don't have a marriage. I think I might just review what happens if one has the goal that the other must win. And the other doesn't, then we don't have a marriage. And the other does, then they come to a solution where in some way they both win and lose equally. And that's acceptable. Does that just zero out then? There's no happiness and pleasure? Probably. You'll probably give up playing chess. That's the real answer, isn't it? Avoid zero-sum games. You can play such where the adult doesn't really mind losing a bit more than the child, and the child is getting a great deal of fun out of winning. But be careful what you're teaching them, because in some sense they're getting addicted to the pleasure that is only a pleasure because it's regardless of the cost to the other. And really our ideal is that they start to love you as you love them. And that's what God's trying to do with us. We're in this game of living, being a child, where He loves us, wants our welfare. And we're not really loving Him to the same degree. It's not our capacity yet. And He's doing all He can to build up our capacity to love as He loves, so that we can be adults in heaven. And given our freedom, and be nothing but blessing to all of us. He knows how to achieve that with his children, and we probably don't know anything like as well how to achieve that. So we might think that zero-sum games are a good experience for our kid until they start to learn how to lose and what it's like to lose in such games. And perhaps that experience in the phenomenal world will give them the values that rescue them into the kingdom of heaven. They become concerned about others by their experience of being in a world where that concern can be absent, and the cost that that implies to the individual. Wow, thank you, Heavenly Father. Thank you, because not that I have quite the solution to the dilemma posed, but in some sense, the dilemma itself in context is good. We experience the dilemma here, but here is not the eternal that we're going to occupy. And here is some illusion, a mere dream compared to the eternal reality. But a dream that furnishes us with a maturity that gives us the key to life eternal, riches in heaven. Thank you, Heavenly Father.